of Kubernetes. Good morning, Kuberverse, on this wonderful Thursday morning. It's 10 a.m. Pacific time, or whenever you watch this stream, it's that time. June 14th. Welcome to the Kubernetes Community Weekly Meeting. I just want to tell everyone before we get started, it would be awesome if we could have, when you're not speaking, you mute your microphone so that we don't have an attack of the keyboard sounds. As well as just a reminder that this is a community meeting and it's being publicly recorded right now. So just be mindful of what you say. The internet is forever. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Zach Arnold. I'm a software engineer for a finance company here in the Bay Area called Y-Green Energy Fund. It's the word energy spelled backwards. And I found that out 6 months after I started working. We are in love with the Kubernetes ecosystem and very, very happy fans. So thank you. Two quick things before we get started. We are 15, George just told me, 15 subscribers shy of 10,000 subscribers in our YouTube channel. So,
1,500. 1,500.
1,500 shy, that's a pretty big milestone. Those numbers are going up quickly. And so I encourage all of you, if you haven't yet done it, go over to YouTube and search for the Kubernetes channel and subscribe. And also, thank you so much to the AWS team. You launched EKS and made a lot of our lives easier this week. And we're all very excited to welcome them to the managed provider hosters. So without further ado, let's jump into the meeting, take a look at this agenda topic. We are going to start with our demo. Priya from Google has a talk about, help me pronounce it correctly, but it's Kanaka or Kanaka?
It is Kanaka. Oh,
Kanaka.
I say Kanaka.
Okay, terrific. So she's going to be presenting on that today. So without further ado, Priya, take it away.
Great, thank you. Okay, awesome. Now I can see. Okay, cool. Yeah, so my name is Priya. I work at Google on the Container Tools team, and I'm going to be talking about Kanaka today. So what is Kanaka? Kanaka is basically a tool used to build images in a Kubernetes cluster. So right now, before Kanaka, I guess the way a lot of people were building images in their clusters was by mounting in Docker sockets or using other tools, which maybe didn't provide the full generality of a Docker file. So Kanaka aimed to solve the problem of having to messily mount in your Docker socket by providing an image which would basically do the Docker build for you in and the Docker push in a standard Kubernetes cluster, meaning that you don't need to give your cluster any extra privileges or permissions. So how does Kanaka work? So Kanaka is basically distributed as an image. It's an image built from scratch, and it contains a few files, including some credential helpers, which are used to push to different registries. Right now, I think we have like a GCR credential helper and one for Amazon ECR, along with some files needed for authentication. But the main thing in the Kanaka image is an executor binary, which basically does the entire process of building the image and then pushing it at the very end. And the way that Kanaka does this is by first parsing the Docker file that you want to build. It extracts the base image of the Docker file to root within the container. And so the base image is the image in the from line of your Docker file. And it takes an initial snapshot of what your base image looks like and stores that in memory. And then Kanaka will basically go through every command in your Docker file, executing that command and then taking a snapshot after each execution to look for any files that may have changed in your file system. And any files that are different will be appended as a new layer onto your base image. And in this manner, Kanaka basically will execute each command, take a snapshot, and then append the layer if any files have changed, thus like building your entire image upon your base image that you specified in your Docker file. And multi-stage builds are really similar. Basically, Kanaka will extract the base image file system, execute the commands, and then delete the file system which it extracted, running through the different stages of your Docker file and building your final image. Great. And so sample pod.yaml for running Kanaka in Kubernetes. In this example, basically all you need is to run the Kanaka image, which is specified right here, and some, and some arguments. So you need to specify a path to your Docker file. And Kanaka accepts two different build contexts right now. So you can specify a local directory with a different flag as your build context for your image build. Or a GCS bucket. To use a GCS bucket, basically you create a tarball of your build context and upload it to the bucket. And then Kanaka, you pass in the name of your bucket to Kanaka, and Kanaka will download and unpack that tarball and use it as your build context. And we actually have a PR in our repo right now for using other storage solutions to store build context. And then lastly, you have to pass in the destination or like the repo that you want your final image to be pushed to. In this example, since we're pushing to GCR, I also have to mount in a secret with the authentication required to push to my private registry. Cool, so I'll do a quick demo of running Kanaka in Kubernetes and in gvisor, which provides an additional security boundary. So first in Kubernetes, we can take a look at the Docker file we're trying to build, which is pretty simple. It's just a Debian image, then we install make and copy over a file foo. And so look at the pod spec. It's really similar to what I just showed in the slide. Specify a bucket where my build context tarball lives and a destination to push to, and then the required authentication is mounted in as well. So we can create the pod. Oops. Yeah, and so the first thing Kanaka will do is download the build context I specified in my GCS bucket and unpack it into a local directory. And then it'll begin to unpack the file system of our base image to root. And in this manner, Kanaka can execute all the commands in user space. Kanaka also finds a list of mounted directories and ignores those during snapshotting because we don't want these directories to end up in our final image. So basically it just goes through and starts executing our commands. Here we're installing make and then taking a snapshot of the file system, and then we copy over our file foo and take a snapshot of that file over here. And then Kanaka will push the image at the very end. So we can pull this image. Yeah, and if we run this image, we should be able to see the file foo, which we copied over and make should be installed, which it is. So that's basically, yeah, a really simple case for running Kanaka and Kubernetes to build and push an image. And then for additional security boundary, you can also run Kanaka in gvisor. Right now, I only have a example running in Docker, but since gvisor also works in Kubernetes, you could combine gvisor and Kanaka to do your image builds really securely. So here, specifying the runtime is runsc to use gvisor. Here I'm mounting in some credentials required to push my image at the very end, using the current directory as our build context and mounting that into the workspace directory. And then I just run Kanaka and specify the destination that I want my final image to be pushed to. And it's basically a really similar process. Kanaka will unpack the base image of the file system, take some snapshots, and then push the image at the very end. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah, any questions?
Thank you so much, Priya. Great job. I know we have some questions here that have come in from chat. So I suppose the first one, it looks like it's from Mr. Burkus. Do you want to ask that question yourself, or would you like me to ask it for you? If he's just on chat, he'll probably let me know.
You can go ahead and ask it.
Okay, so it says question one, Priya, is do you have to use Docker files, or are there other instruction sets that that Kanaka can take?
Right now, we only support Docker files, but if you're interested in anything else, please create an issue in the repo and we can check it out.
Cool. And the next question, it looks like from Patrick Lang over at SIG Windows, is which Docker file verbs are supported?
All of them, actually.
Okay. And then Arun asked if the bucket could be an S3 bucket, and Raul asked if it could also be a DigitalOcean space. I think you mentioned this at the beginning, but.
Yeah, we actually have a PR that we're working on right now to support other storage solutions for a build context. So hopefully soon.
Cool. Austin asked whether or not it had feature parity with Docker build.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just the exact same as Docker build.
Yeah,
just
we're just trying to recreate Docker build and Docker, but in an easier way to use in a cluster.
I'm trying to interpret Joe's question here. Oh, this might not be a question. Oh, never mind. Not a question. Sorry. Okay. Looks like that's all the questions. Does anyone else have any questions for Priya? Or compliments, pats on the back?
Great job, Priya.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was a great job. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Terrific, terrific, terrific. Moving right along on schedule. So it's time to take a look at the next thing. Oh, sorry. Before we move on, Priya, if possible, could you place a link to your slides inside of the Kubernetes meeting notes? Let me post.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'll add that now.
There you go. And release updates. So now we're going to kick it over to Josh Burkus from DockerCon. Josh, tell us the good news.
Yep. Howdy, everybody from DockerCon. So we're in the middle of code freeze, a little past the middle of code freeze, actually. We've got less than a week of code freeze left. The plan is to lift code freeze on Tuesday and branch and RC1 on Wednesday. And as far as I know, and as things are looking now, that will happen on time, barring unexpected developments. If you have a feature in 1.11, your docs are already past due. So if you have not finished your documentation, change, even if it's not a trackable feature, you need to do that ASAP. Contact SIG docs if you need help. CI signal is good. We've got a couple of tests being flaky. Alpha features are being flaky. If you're actually in charge of an alpha feature in this release, you may be hearing from Aish or from test infra today If it turns out to be your feature that is causing the flakiness, they're currently trying to track that down. There's only a couple of issues and only a handful of PRs open. This is, at this point, if I'm not jinxing things, the most sort of on-time release train that we have had, as far as I know. And that's just mostly because we've been lucky not to have any unexpected developments that throw off the schedule. So let's hope it continues going that way. And once again, thank you to everybody, contributors, SIG leads, release team, DIMS and Liggett, and everybody else who has done so much to make sure that problems and test breakage and other things got taken care of quickly, so that we can keep this on time. And then I'm going to turn it over to our incoming 112 release lead, Tim Pepper.
So we are shaping up the 112 team currently. We're adding, or tentatively adding, a new role for PR triage. We've had issue triage, features, and CI issue particularly in the past, but as we no longer have a requirement on PRs being mapped specifically to issues, the issue one is maybe ramping down a bit, but still capture certain stuff, and PRs that aren't exactly associated clearly with artifacts that are visible to the team is becoming more of a concern that we need to have some visibility there. So we're looking to add that, and we're in need of somebody who might be a volunteer for that role. And then also the branch manager role is open currently. And probably maybe today or tomorrow, I will post a potential draft-ish, very drafty schedule for discussion around 112. And that's about it. We're kind of trying to get this ball rolling a little bit earlier and progress smoothly from 111 to 112. If you're interested in volunteering for the team, let me know. Hit me up on Slack, SIG release. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Josh, anything else? I am going to assume by the pause, no. It looks like 110.4 went out about 8 days ago, so just patch release update. Jace, is there anything that you wanted to mention as 110 release lead?
Nope, we're all good.
Okay, so it looks like 110.4 is just another awesome stability update, which puts us right along into the KEP of the week. If you don't know what the word KEP means, it stands for Kubernetes Enhancement Proposal, and there's plenty of information. Actually, there's a plethora of information that can be found inside of lots of the Kubernetes repos with all of the lovely information on KEPs, and most of the community repo. So Andrew Sycam is planning on talking to us about the cloud provider KEP. Did I pronounce it wrong? I'm so sorry. Did I pronounce it wrong?
Yeah, no, it's good.
Say it one more time.
Sorry?
Oh, say it one more time for me. Sycam?
It doesn't matter. It's like you can fly like him. It's just a middle name. Doesn't matter for me. But yeah, cool. Thanks. So yeah, I'm Andrew. I'm a software engineer at DigitalOcean, and I'm one of the chairs for SIG Cloud Provider. So to provide some background on SIG Cloud Provider, it was created last week, so we're very new. And prior to that, we were a working group, and our focus was kind of around refactoring Kubernetes, extending its APIs so that we can actually support new providers without adding so many dependencies into the project. And so out of this effort, we actually realized that the scope of that work is actually a lot bigger than we originally thought. And so this is kind of why we pushed for forming a SIG so that we can kind of address those issues longer term. So with that in mind, the SIG has kind of three main focuses right now. One is kind of creating and formalizing a onboarding process for new providers that kind of want to support Kubernetes to the best that they can. And also kind of setting kind of a certain level of technical excellence that we can kind of expect from all those providers. The second is improving documentation around providers. So we understand that right now, cloud provider documentation is not great. There's a lot of features that we kind of integrate with in Kubernetes with different cloud providers, but how those features work and how to operate with those features is kind of unclear. So we want to improve that. And we also want to improve testing, which is what this KEP is about. We want to get to a point where every cloud provider is active about testing the latest versions of Kubernetes, publishing those results somewhere where SIG testing and SIG release can kind of consume those and kind of act on those quickly. And so about the KEP, so the KEP is really short, and it's just really outlining what I just said. It's a proposal that talks about why we want conformance tests reported by all the cloud providers, and it talks about like how the cloud providers can actually go about doing that. So this is something that the working group previously wanted to do, but for the longest time we couldn't do it. I think we talked about it maybe like a year ago, but we couldn't do it because we didn't have actually like a formal way of a KEP to actually propose this, where we can get all the interested parties involved. We also didn't have, so kind of the amazing work that SIG testing has done around testing infrastructure, we didn't have access to that. That wasn't available back then. And so now with SIG testing creating test grid, and they have kind of a more formalized process for actually running tests and reporting those tests somewhere, we can actually have concrete instructions for providers to follow to actually report those results. And lastly, OpenStack has also been doing a lot of work leading the charge on actually testing this out, kind of fixing all the bugs along. They've actually led a pretty good example of how to actually run these tests, upload them to test grid. And so we can kind of take their lead and follow their lead on running conformance tests on a regular basis and then reporting those to SIG testing and SIG release. So going forward, we're going to be pushing for, we want all providers to do this eventually. And so we understand this is a pretty big effort, requires a lot of time. It's going to require a lot of coordination with all the different providers. So we'll be reaching out to the various SIGs, various cloud providers to kind of work together to make sure that this KEP is visible and that everyone is aware of this effort, and that all the providers are kind of just making sure that we're aware that this is something that we want from all the providers. And it's also important to note that the KEP, if you read the KEP, you'll realize that it's missing a lot of important details. And this is because KEPs are meant to be iterative. So we're supposed to kind of, as long as we agree on the general direction of the KEP, we understand that there's a lot of like important things missing, but we're going to address those kind of in the future as we gain more experience around how to do conformance tests and how to upload those properly. So I think that's it for me. Do you guys have any questions around the KEP?
You list as one of the motivations getting results because that will lead to improving coverage, but then explicitly have improving coverages out of scope. Do you see maybe a follow-on KEP then once things are flowing to encourage coverage increase? Because the conformance coverage is pretty low today.
Yeah. Yeah, so like you said, out of scope today, but definitely in the future, I can see us kind of working with SIG testing to improve that coverage. But like to ask providers to increase coverage is not something that we think everyone is on board to do, or like they're not willing to kind of put that as a priority. So that's kind of where we stand right now.
Awesome. Any other questions? Terrific. Thank you, Andrew, for that totally cubular update. We are moving on to, looks like we got some open KEPs here. I just posted a link here to the open KEPs if you're wanting to find out just a little bit more about what's going on inside of the KEP space as far as what projects are being proposed, which ones are actually in progress, and we have the lovely, I didn't even know that GitHub had a Trello-like board. That's kind of awesome. So I personally enjoyed taking a look at that. Moving on to SIG updates. So we're going to start with SIG Windows with one Mr. Patrick Lang talking about Kubernetes features to the Windows release. So Patrick, take it away for us.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Patrick Lang. I happen to work over at Microsoft, but anyway, Michael, who's also on the call, and I are the two chairs for SIG Windows. And so I'm going to go ahead and share out some content real quick here, just so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, can you see that okay, Zach?
I see it.
All right, good. All right, so one of the things that we've been doing that's a bit unique with Windows is that release over release on Windows, we're releasing at 2 times per year now as part of what we call the Windows Server semi-annual channel. But basically, we've got these date-coded releases like 1709 and 1803, which just went out. And one of the things that we've discovered is as we're getting to certain features in Kubernetes, there's been cases where we've had to go actually make changes to Windows in order for things to work in a way that's more compatible with Kubernetes. So like one of the most recent examples was the way that we had implemented symbolic links on Windows was very different, and it made it difficult to set up the same directory structure that was used for things like secrets and config maps, where the kubelet was putting all of these over in folders that it managed, but then creating symlinks to give a consistent file system view to that pod. And so we made some changes, and as a result, some of these new features are going to require the newer version of Windows here. So if you've got anybody that's basically trying to see what the best releases of Windows is to use based on the features they need, we've got that in this board here. And this is something that we're going to have maintained basically release until we get up to the point that we're looking to graduate out of beta and go to GA. So that's something that's a little bit different. If anybody's got other recommendations of better ways to get this information out, I'd love to hear it. Drop me a line in Slack. But I guess the key thing is if you're working on building clusters with both Linux and Windows in there, best practice is always use the latest release there, because we're adding so much stuff there. And in Kube 1.11, we're had a nice big list of features there in terms of getting some of the Windows specific stuff for security contexts done, finally implementing kubelet stats. So that was way overdue, but it's there now. And so that should be able to enable some things I've been missing, like horizontal pod auto scaling. And then the main areas that we're hard at work on now are mostly focused around actually finishing out the rest of what's needed in the ecosystem. And so a couple examples there are things like today all the development we're doing is still using Docker shim for the CRI implementation. And so we've got teams that are contributing to SIG Windows and other projects like Containerd and also Cryo's under evaluation. But as a group, we're figuring out which path we want to go forward between those, or possibly both. So that way we can better align with the deprecation plan for Docker shim as that comes along. And then we've also got members that are working in projects like OVN Kubernetes, Flannel, Calico, and then some of the cloud provider specific plugins like our Azure CNI plugin that we use on Azure. But I know that I've had pings from the other cloud providers as well. So basically getting the rest of those pieces together that are needed to really build a complete production deployment is kind of the main thing that we're working on now. And then the last big topic that I wanted to cover is that we've got a team within the SIG that's been working on getting support for the node end-to-end and conformance tests. So they're making really good progress there. The pass rate is something around 70% right now. A large part of what's actually failing is tests that are taking dependencies on Linux-specific features rather than things that are actually part of the kube functionality. So over the next couple of weeks to month, I'm going to be taking a number of PRs in for things like Prow to be able to go ahead and kick off the Windows tests automatically. We're going to have a PR to kube test to go ahead and schedule things on clusters that contain both Linux and Windows nodes in them. So that way we get that additional coverage up there on test grid. And so we want to have those numbers coming out regularly so we can use that as one of the benchmarks for being to graduate from beta to general availability. So we're hoping to be able to show that quality and that consistency there for probably, looks like most likely version 12 or 13, which is going to line up with the Windows Server 2019 release that comes out this fall. And the thing that's important about that release is that's one that the two releases I mentioned that were part of the semi-annual ones, those are short-term releases. They only have an 18-month support cycle from Microsoft. 2019 is going to be, the 5 years minimum, plus there's a separate extended support cycle there. So we want to make sure that that's the one that Kube is ready for GA on, towards the end of this year. So I think those are all the main updates I wanted to give. Let's see, there was a couple questions here. So Moore question around Unix style symlinks. And so the answer is that we've got something that's like a symlink and we've got something that's like a hard link. So the one that's like a symlink basically has a reparse point and says, go to this other file. And so basically in that case, we have to make sure that the path is canonicalized on the host before that file access is actually allowed within the pod. And so that's what's different than what we did in 1803. And that makes sure that also you can't traverse things in an insecure way, because the paths are always canonicalized within the scope of the file system namespace for that container. There's also hard links possible, but in general, I wouldn't really recommend them. They're kind of difficult to create, and a lot of I just want to recommend it. Focus on using the symlinks that we do, and we've got an example. If you go look at the kubelet code for Windows for what lays out the files for config maps and secrets. And I don't know whether or not the code to make the symlinks is actually right there in the kubelet, or if it's in the Go WinIO library. It's in one place or the other. But anyway, there's code out there to show you how to do that. And then there's a question from Bob. Is Windows presently Docker Shim plus embedded EE? I'm not sure what you mean by embedded EE, but for Windows Server, Docker actually publishes what they call Docker EE Basic. And so those are updated pretty frequently. I think the current version is something like 1706 EE 13. It's just over there on the Docker site, but that's the one that we're using for all the testing on Windows today. Once we've got Containerd or Cryo up, that may change, but we're also, of course, Docker's looking at Kubernetes support, so there's a chance that that the right Containerd build may just be packaged alongside the Docker EE builds within the same installer. That's something that's still TBD. So anyway, I think that's everything I had. If anyone's got anything else, feel free to ping me on Slack, and thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, it doesn't look like it, so we're going to move on to the next SIG. Thanks again, Patrick. It looks like we're on to SIG apps with Mr. Owens. Kenneth, are you on?
How's it going, everybody? I'm off now.
Hold up.
Hold up.
And all right, hold up.
1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute.
I'm back now, I think. Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yes.
All right, cool. Oops. Okay, for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Kenneth Owens. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Anandan and Matt of SIG Apps. And I'm going to give you an update today of what we've been up to lately. So I believe Matt spoke at the last community meeting about Helm graduating to its own CNCF subproject. For anybody who's not aware of that, that's really a big thing for the Helm community, and they're super excited about it. That being said, it seems like Helm maintainers are still participating in SIG apps, and Matt's going to continue in his role as co-chair there. Since the last time we gave an update, Helm 2 has had a stability release. It's basically break fix. And Yeah, just general stability patches. The Helm 3 proposals merged and work is in progress moving forward on that. In the world of applications, so we have a SIG-sponsored project for the application CRD, which really seeks to kind of describe an application instance as it's running in a cluster. We plan to, in the next quarter, implement a controller for that. We're discussing moving the CRD resource to beta, and contributions are very welcome. So still a work in progress. As far as the app dev working group, it seems that we're going to wind that down. And the proposal that came out of the working group for well-known labels and annotations, we will merge in a partial form in the near future. We finally got approval on that. We're just waiting on tech review as far as I can tell. For KSonnet, Brian's cut a new release there, 10.02. It's now available. You can go and check it out. Some cool new features. For charts, the big news is that their proposal open for moving Helm charts to a decentralized repo. The centralized repository model that we've got right now for incubator and stable just really isn't scaling very well. So we want to break that up and go decentralized. In Scaffold world, customized support has just been added, and it'll be in the next release. For our charter, we're still waiting on approval from the steering committee, but we hope to get a charter merged soon. And then for some other general work in progress on the workloads API, we want to focus on promotion of the batch API. Basically, the only thing left on the workloads API that's still beta is cron job. But prior to promoting cron job to GA, we want to make sure job is stable first, right? Like cron job creates many jobs. If job is not doing what we would like it to do, that could be problematic for everybody's cluster. So in order to maintain cluster stability, we want to do a little bit of work around there before promoting cron job. And then we have a rather interesting KEP that's been proposed for first class support of sidecars. This is something that if we move forward with, we're probably going to have to move forward with in conjunction with SIG node, and probably something that we would want to take to SIG architecture. But the general feedback that we've been getting from the community thus far seems like to be very supportive of the idea. That being said, this KEP really needs some work in terms of fleshing out the actual technical details of the implementation. And that's basically it for the update. Any questions, comments, feedback?
You have one question here in the chat from Mr. Wise. It looks like it says, to being annoyingly pedantic, I believe Helm is no longer a sub-project, but an independent incubation level project in the CNCF. Did charts not go with it? Bob, feel free to expand on your if you'd like to.
Yeah, so there was just a bunch of commentary about distributing charts, not distributing charts, central repo, distributed repo. And I was curious what that was all about. I would have thought the charts actually went with Helm into the CNCF project.
No, Helm is a project that's actually a program, right? It's software. Charts are kind of an artifact that Helm uses to deploy something, right? There are maintainers for charts, but and maybe it falls under Helm governance at some point, but it doesn't seem to be moving as an officially CNCF supported project.
So Helm, even though Helm code I would still argue that Helm, the charts are shared code, but
they're YAML.
Yeah, well, okay.
But if we want to be okay.
My comment, I would still stick to that perspective. It's, I think, a little bit confusing if a whole bunch of charts are still being managed in the Kubernetes community when the code's moved out. But is that the intention, or is that just something that's being worked out?
So I think Matt Farina or Matt Butcher would be better people to ask about that. I contribute to some of the charts, but I'm not a charts maintainer. Helm is still working on what its governance model is going to be. I believe last week, Matt Butcher got an initial proposal out for their model. So I'm not really sure what their plan is. The decentralization of charts repositories is really in support of organizations having their own internal repositories and being able to also talk to like public repositories. So that's more of a technical than a technical implementation proposal than it is a governance model proposal.
Yeah,
That makes
So let
sense.
me just echo, I'm looking here at the chat. So Joe, I'm really kind of asking that question, which is, hey, like we need clean lines here. So I'll just echo your comment. This was really what was generating my question. Seems a bit confusing. That was an invitation for Joe to speak up, but maybe.
Sorry, I'm in a shared space. I think, Helm charts were managed under the same governance as Helm with the same group of people as a sub-project of SIG-Apps. If Helm's moving out, but the charts are not, then are Helm charts now a sub-project of SIG-Apps? Who's leading that project? What's the governance around that? I think it's just getting some clarity here would be helpful.
Speaking, Helm charts each now have their own maintainers with their own owners files, right? The Helm source code itself has a set of maintainers. The Helm maintainers and the previous SIG-App sub-project that was Helm are graduating to CNCF Incubator.
So just be clear, it's not a graduation. This is not a sort of standard path. We don't expect everybody to follow in this path. I think what happened here is that Helm decided to exit Kubernetes and then separately apply to the CNCF, and that's not something that we expect to happen, for every sub-project here. So this is not an expected path forward. So I think we got to be careful about, how we signal that to folks in the larger community. And also just because there's an owner's file doesn't mean that it's a sub-project. I think there's still this issue around, who's curating these things, who's approving these, who's deciding when we actually take on new charts, establish those new owners files. I think that's something that if this stuff is gonna maintain in a Kubernetes repo under SIG-Apps, then SIG-Apps has to have some governance around that and view that as a separate sub-project. I find it really surprising that the charts didn't go with Helm, as they moved out. Now, another option here is to say charts no longer belong part of the Kubernetes organization in GitHub, and then say each chart is now on its own to actually maintain its own processes. That's also something that I think SIG-Apps could do. But I think just getting some clarity here would be really great.
So as it stands right now, charts is listed still as a sub-project inside of SIG-Apps with a top-level owners file for the charts. Each individual chart has its own owners and maintainers because having the top-level owners file that consisted of several maintainers from various companies and SIG-Apps became too burdensome to lead to high-quality charts. That is the current status of the governance surrounding it. It is not as formal as some of the other sub-projects, but it is not as informal as some others as well. And as far as what that's going to look like going forward, I mean, I would generally like to defer to the current owners, it's not a complete overlap between Helm maintainers. In fact, there are fewer Helm maintainers that are chart maintainers, if that makes sense. But we will, if there is a large community concern in terms of consumers and or people who are actively contributing to charts, we're always willing to listen, and we're trying to do the best thing for the community.
Well, so one of the things I'm looking at sigs.yaml right now, and there's a pointer to charts tooling, which is code for actually tooling charts. Is that actually part of the charts sub-project, or is that part of Helm? Because it was part of the Kubernetes Helm organization, which I assume got renamed as part of this.
That I'm not sure. Charts tooling would be code though. Does that live in the actual charts repo?
Well, if you look in sigs.yaml, it's listed as part of the charts sub-project, and it points to Kubernetes-Helm. I'm not saying I think we just need to think this through, get some clarity here, and create some clean lines of separation between Helm charts and Helm. And I think this is also going to be interesting as Helm continues to evolve as a project. How does that actually impact the Helm's chart sub-project that's part of Kubernetes?
For sure. I think in my mind, the right thing to actually do is to let the Helm maintainers and the charts maintainers work towards a model that works for them. Because primarily, I don't see this as particularly interesting to Helm chart consumers so much as people who are actively maintaining them. They're the ones who are going to be most affected by the governance surrounding the charts and who would be most affected by the ownership.
Yeah, there's some other issues here that I think we should think through, but we can take it offline. I don't want to rat hole here.
Okay.
Okay. Well, sounded like an awesome discussion. definitely something that needs to get figured out. Thank you guys so much for having it. For the last SIG, it looks like SIGDocs is going to be out this week. I saw Jen Rondeau. She was on the call. So Jen, if you wanted to give a SIGDocs update, feel free to, but otherwise I'm super duper just like letting you know now.
I thought that Zach Corleason was available.
Yeah, unfortunately he's out today.
It's not, and nobody has pinged me. How about I give a 1-minute update, and then we can possibly rotate SIGDocs in for something more comprehensive in a little bit. Sure. I suppose the biggest news for the community as a whole is that we are making really excellent progress on issues against the Hugo migration. Those issues, there are still some outstanding issues, and there will continue to be broken bits for a while yet. But we have plowed through a ton of stuff with many thanks to a huge community that stepped up to help. There's been all kinds of first-time contributors helping us do this. So that's been really pretty awesome. We are also working like mad, sort of backing up Misty as release meister for 111. And along with Josh, appreciate everybody's diligence about their 111 PRs and happy to help if anybody needs help. And that's all I got.
Thanks so much, Jen. I appreciate you hopping in there. Yep, don't forget 111 docs. Docs. Okay.
All the time.
All right, well, with that, that concludes SIG updates. So we're on to announcements and shout outs and all the goodness like that. And we'll try to wrap this up here in the next 5 minutes and get you guys back to your day. So it looks like Kubernetes office hours is next week. It looks like Wednesday, if I'm doing that math really quickly. Yep. So Wednesday next week. If you want to hop in, we're looking for volunteers, contributors, or maintainers. Please ping George or anybody actually from the SIG Contribex team. And we are providing some incentive for contributors to show up. Users who participate will be entered in a raffle to win a Kubernetes shirt. So definitely do that. I actually might try to do that myself. So there's a link inside of the notes, and you can go over there to obviously ping SIG Contribex on Slack and get more information that way. SIG leads, if you have not uploaded your meeting videos to the YouTube channel recently, please try to catch up. Ping George if you need some help uploading or accessing your recordings. This helps us to keep sort of a universal system of record of what's going on as an open community. And obviously so that people who miss the individual SIG meetings have the opportunity to catch up on what they missed. So moving on to shout outs, Josh Burkus was thanking Jordan and, oh, I'm going to butcher this name, so I'm going to skip right over. I'm so sorry. His username is @dims. For pitching in and doing a ton of work on PRs for Kubernetes 111, the release across the entirety of the code base. Thank you guys so much. Jen Rondeau was calling out Misty and thanking her for stepping up in all the things of docs, no matter how crazy they get or how much she has on her plate. So thank you so much, Misty. Aish called out Mr. Augustus for giving us a huge head start and herding all the cats to get a stellar 112 release team already in place. I think we're all really excited to work with Tim Pepper as the release lead for 112, so that'll be a lot of fun. Misty and Aish were thanking Josh for herding all of the 111 release cats. And Aish specifically said, huge shout out for being an awesome and patient leader throughout the 111 cycle. It was such a learning experience seeing him watch or work through issues calmly, all the while encouraging the release team to lead a little bit in our own way. And finally, it looks like Jason Tiberius called out Lubomir Ivanov for the docs contributions to KubeADM version 111, and Jen Rondeau for the relentless work on improving our docs and helping to bring some more structure to the SIG cluster lifecycle documentation. So, and that concludes, it looks like, all of the shout outs, unless anyone wants to give one really quickly right here.
I do have a follow-on announcement. SIG Architecture would like to everyone know that they have a new meeting time That's 11 PST every Thursday. I'll go make sure that the notes are correct and translated to UTC and stuff.
Every other Thursday.
Oh, thank you.
Office hours, the alternate.
Okay, I'll make sure the notes reflect whatever reality is.
Terrific. So with that, it wraps up our meeting a little bit ahead of schedule. So thanks so much, guys, for hanging out with me in this wonderful installment of the Kubernetes community meeting. You guys are all awesome people, and I hope you have an incredible, incredible week. We'll see you a week from today.